I never imagined how quiet a house could feel with two people living in it. My husband and I used to talk for hours. Now, silence lingers between us like a fog. He comes home late most nights, smelling faintly of office air and exhaustion. We don't fight. We've simply stopped trying. His words are limited to practical things. Bills. Groceries. The dog. There's no softness anymore, no pause to look at me the way he once did. I catch my reflection sometimes, wondering if I've changed, or if he just stopped seeing me. Last Thursday, he casually mentioned that 3 of his old college friends would be visiting for the weekend. "They'll be staying over," he added, already walking out of the room. I nodded like I always do. That evening, I found myself deep cleaning parts of the house no one ever notices. I ironed pillowcases, rearranged the guest bathroom, restocked the bar. I cooked dishes I hadn't made in months. Something inside me stirred, an old, dormant part that cared about how I looked, how I smelled, how I moved. I didn't recognize her at first. By Friday morning, the house was spotless. I lit candles I usually save for anniversaries. I caught myself brushing my hair a second time, applying lip balm, even though I had no plans to leave the house. I stared into the mirror. My eyes looked tired, but something else flickered there, anticipation. I wasn't expecting anything specific, but I wasn't numb either. That felt dangerous. He messaged around noon. "They'll be here by 6. No, thank you. No, I appreciate you doing this. Just facts, like always." I busied myself in the kitchen, making 3 different appetizers. I set out wine and whiskey. I wore a simple dress. Nothing provocative, but not thoughtless either. It hugged in the right places. I told myself it didn't mean anything. As the clock neared 6, I stood by the living room window, pretending to adjust the curtains. My heart beat faster than I expected. I told myself it was just nerves. Hosting always made me anxious. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about entertaining. It was about being seen. When I saw the headlights pull into the driveway, I instinctively smoothed my dress. My hands were slightly shaking. I hadn't felt that in years. It wasn't fear. It was a kind of electricity I thought I'd lost after the 3rd year of our marriage. The car door opened. I saw silhouettes, laughter, men tossing their bags out of the trunk. He stepped out and waved at me, without looking up. They followed behind him, loud and energetic, full of memories I hadn't been part of. They walked toward the door, their voices growing clearer. I took one last deep breath and turned the handle. As the door opened, I smiled. Not for them, not even for him, but for the part of me that was wide awake again. They stepped inside with a kind of energy I hadn't felt in our home for a long time. Laughter, banter, the smell of cologne and travel. My husband barely introduced them before heading off to pour drinks. The first man offered me a warm smile and a compliment about the house. The second said he was starving and everything smelled amazing. The third's eyes lingered for just a moment too long before he looked away. I noticed, and I think he knew I did. I guided them into the living room while my husband opened a bottle of whiskey. One of them leaned in slightly as I passed him a glass, his fingers brushing mine. Accidental, maybe. Or maybe not. I didn't react, but the touch stayed with me. My husband started telling stories from college, loud and animated. I played the role of the listening wife, smiling where I should, laughing politely. But my attention drifted elsewhere, how one of them sat back with quiet eyes, watching me carefully, or how another's laughter always ended with a quick glance in my direction. They talked for hours. At one point, I brought out a second round of snacks. The flirty one helped without being asked. He followed me into the kitchen, leaning against the counter while I plated the food. "You didn't have to go all out," he said, voice low, casual. I shrugged and said I liked to host. He nodded slowly, eyes not leaving mine, then added, "Still, it's nice to feel taken care of." There was nothing inappropriate in his tone, but the weight behind the words made my skin prickle. Back in the living room, the energy shifted just slightly. My husband, relaxed now, scrolled through his phone while the others filled the silence. I caught the quiet one's eyes on my legs, then flicking back up when he realized I'd noticed. It wasn't rude or invasive, just observant. Curious. There was a kind of silent awareness building between us. I was no longer invisible. When I brought out dessert, I felt it again, those subtle changes in posture when I entered the room. One leaned back just a little to make space for me on the couch. Another offered to take the empty plates, even though I refused. The space around me pulsed with something wordless. It wasn't about beauty. It was about attention. Presence. Being noticed in ways my husband hadn't done in years. Later in the evening, as conversation faded into comfortable quiet, I felt one of them glance my way again. This time, I didn't look away. I held it, just for a second. And in that second, something shifted. Not just in him. In me. I had been so numb for so long that I forgot what it felt like to be wanted. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about lust yet. It was about the crack forming in something I thought was solid. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stop it. The house had gone quiet. My husband passed out in the bedroom, snoring faintly, the whiskey having done its job. I wasn't tired. My body buzzed in a way that sleep couldn't touch. I walked into the hallway, barefoot, unsure of what I was looking for. I told myself I was just making sure everything was cleaned up. I told myself I was only checking the lights. But when I heard a quiet voice behind me, I didn't flinch. "You're still up?" he asked. The one who had helped in the kitchen. The one whose words always felt like more than they were. I turned slightly, nodded. "Couldn't sleep," I said. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough. "Me neither." His voice was lower now, quieter. Everything in his tone was deliberate. I should have walked away. I should have said goodnight. But I didn't. We stood there for a moment that stretched too long. There was no more laughter, no background noise, just two people suspended in a silence that hummed with something unsaid. He looked at me like I was a question he wanted to answer slowly. I didn't move when his hand lifted toward my face, fingers barely grazing my cheek before dropping again. He didn't kiss me. He didn't need to. I turned away, finally. My breath was shallow, my pulse loud. But instead of walking back to my room, I went into the kitchen. I heard him follow a moment later. I pretended to pour a glass of water I didn't need. He leaned against the counter again, just like earlier, but this time it was different. This time, we weren't strangers pretending to make small talk. I set the glass down without drinking. He stepped closer. When he touched me, it wasn't rough or rushed. It was deliberate, calculated, testing the boundary I hadn't set. His hand rested on my waist, his mouth near my ear. He didn't say anything. He didn't need permission. I didn't give it. I just didn't stop him. The air between us thickened. I didn't think about my husband. I didn't think about what it meant. I only thought about how my skin responded to him, how my body leaned into his without command. The first kiss was quiet, exploratory, more of a question than a statement. I didn't pull away. Instead, I answered with my hands, gripping his shirt, pressing into him. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't gentle either. We didn't speak. We let the tension talk for us. Months, maybe years, of silence in my marriage pouring into the way his hands explored me. It wasn't love. It wasn't even comfort. It was escape. Heat. Clarity in the middle of chaos. When it was over, I didn't feel regret. I felt breathless. Alive. Like I'd finally done something real, something selfish. He looked at me like he knew. Then he left, quietly. I stood there alone, heartbeat pounding, knowing the line wasn't just crossed, it was erased. The morning air felt colder than usual. I wrapped my hands around a mug of coffee, watching steam curl upward like a secret I couldn't take back. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence. It had weight now. Tension. My husband came into the kitchen, kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, and asked about breakfast. I nodded, replied softly, avoiding his eyes. He looked rested, happy even. Like nothing had shifted. Like everything was normal. I turned when I heard footsteps behind me. The man from last night entered with a nod, his expression unreadable. No words passed between us, but there was a flicker, recognition, restraint, maybe guilt. Or maybe just memory. He poured himself coffee, stood near the window, never too close. He didn't need to say anything. We both understood what last night was. What it wasn't. Another one of the friends came in a minute later, the one who had watched me too closely the night before. His glance was longer this time. Knowing. He saw something or heard something or simply guessed. There was a small smirk, not cruel, but calculated. I ignored it, pretended I didn't see, but the weight of being seen in that way tightened around my ribs. I set plates on the table, hands steady even though my thoughts weren't. My husband told another story, laughed loudly, and thanked me for being such a great host. He didn't notice anything different about me. Not the way I avoided certain glances. Not the way my smile held too long or not long enough. He noticed nothing at all. That was the problem, wasn't it? We all sat together for breakfast, casual conversation floating through the room, but I wasn't really part of it. My mind drifted. Not to what happened, but to why it happened. I didn't feel guilty the way I expected. I felt guilty for not feeling worse. For how easy it had been. For how little resistance I had. It hadn't been about passion, not really. It had been about being noticed, touched, remembered as something more than furniture in my own home. After they left, my husband wrapped his arms around me and said, "You were amazing this weekend." I smiled into his shoulder, eyes open, empty. He had no idea. I wondered if he'd ever know. I wondered if I wanted him to. Some part of me did, just to see if he'd finally look at me the way they had. But I knew he wouldn't. I sat alone that afternoon, legs curled under me, staring out the window. It should have felt like a mistake. It didn't. It felt like the truth had finally pushed its way out from under years of pretending. I didn't know what came next. I wasn't planning an affair. I wasn't falling in love. I had crossed a line and wasn't sure if I cared enough to go back. What I knew, more clearly than ever, was that silence can make you do things, want things, accept things. And once you've been touched by something real, even for one night, you start to question everything you've been settling for.